Y'all have made my day. When they told us, when we asked if we could move it inside, that we could only have 25, my assumption was, well, we won't have to worry about that. But you all proved me wrong, and I think this just says so much about Cornelius and the rest of North Mecklenburg and the commitment that we have to justice, to fairness, and to stepping up in solidarity with people who are being targeted for violence and hate. So thank you, North Mecklenburg and beyond. I'm Pam Jones. I'm president of Unity and Community, and I'll be emceeing tonight. We're here tonight to denounce the hate and violence directed towards our Asian brothers and sisters, and to show solidarity and support for them. Their struggle for justice and equality is our struggle. We have some great speakers, and again, I'm amazed that all of our speakers, we're waiting on one, I believe, is it's Senator Mohammed. He was actually to be our first speaker, but I think we will continue, and when he gets here, we'll make him the next speaker. Is this, okay. So, want to just ask everyone, I see everyone is masked up. Please continue throughout our time together to wear your mask and make sure it's covering your mouth and nose. And socially distance, you're looking good as much as you can. I'd first like to acknowledge we have a couple of our North Mecklenburg elected officials with us here tonight, and I want to thank them for coming. Dr. Miltish, I see you, I'm Commissioner. Well, it is Doctor. Dr. Commissioner.
They just call me Dr.
And I'm going to hold off on Commissioner Sisson since she's one of our speakers. I saw a hand.
Dennis? Mayor.
Mayor Marshall. Oh, sorry.
Had to take off his mask.
Thank you so much for being here.
And
I
Dennis?
know Dennis Billadu was here.
He's in the back.
That's it. And am I missing anyone else? All right then. So we will get started, we wanted to start this evening with a moment of silence in remembrance for those Asian Americans and others who lost their lives in Atlanta, and for those who lost their lives in Boulder. Thank you. So, Senator Mohammed has not arrived yet, correct? Ah! Senator, please come forward. You want to hold it right there because I have my mask off.
Okay.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm so excited to introduce our first speaker, and that is the Honorable Senator Mujtaba Mohammed. Senator Mohammed represents Mecklenburg's 38th District in the North Carolina Senate. He is currently serving in his second term. Senator Mohammed is only the second Asian American to serve in the North Carolina State Senate. He started his career representing underprivileged children and families as a public interest lawyer. And we are honored to have you, Senator. Thank you for making the trip from Raleigh.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate y'all bearing with me. Getting here straight from your North Carolina General Assembly, the North Carolina Senate. It's a pleasure to be here with each and every one of you. I just want to begin by saying and acknowledging the sad and the senseless loss of life that we saw in Atlanta and even in Colorado. Folks need to really remember that this useless gun violence that we've had, the rise in hate crime that we've had in our country is an epidemic, and it needs to be addressed. The victims that lost their lives, they're somebody's mother, they're somebody's father, they're somebody's son, they're somebody's daughter, and it's deeply heartbreaking. I want to also thank my colleague in the North Carolina Senate, one of your representatives, State Senator Natasha Marcus. I'm not sure if she's here today, but it's an honor to be in her Senate district with each of you. What I will say as an elected representative, I believe my #1 responsibility is the health, safety, and well-being of all people in North Carolina. And let me emphasize that when I say all people in our great state. That means we must always acknowledge that our diversity is our strength and demand that responding to hate crimes must be a priority because they affect all of us. Hate crimes not only have a harmful impact on one victim, but they also terrorize and isolate an entire community. In fact, a victim's whole community is impacted. And that weakens public safety for each and every one of us. I especially want to point out that one of the critical points of the Hate Crime Prevention Act that State Senator Jay Chaudhry from Wake County, Senator Valerie Foushee, and myself were the primary sponsors, and your very own State Senator Natasha Marcus, who's also a co-sponsor on that bill. One of the most critical points of this legislation that it expands the scope of hate crimes or punitive measures. It also provides the necessary and critical investment in law enforcement agencies to do a couple of things: to assist with properly identifying, responding, and reporting hate crimes in North Carolina. Any person with a background in maybe statistics, data, understands that oftentimes data helps us drive problem solving and is a form of guidance for each and every one of us. So if we don't report hate crime data, oftentimes the people that are in the decision-making seat and folks like the public doesn't think that something's a real issue or is a real problem. But as you've seen in Atlanta, like you saw in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, where 3 young Muslim Americans were murdered execution style in their very own home, just 2.5 hours away from here. It has a significant impact. What I will say in addition, when law enforcement doesn't report hate crime data, it sends a clear message that we don't value public safety for all people. And it provides no incentive for victims of hate crime to come forward or feel as if they might be a future target if they do. So that is why I'm thrilled to join Senator Chaudhry, Senator Foushee, and even your own state Senator Natasha Marcus in introducing this piece of legislation, hopefully early next week. We're tweaking some language in the bill. Would love your support in helping make North Carolina a much more equitable state. But what I will say is, and you probably heard this, behind every hate crime is a message. That message is that you don't belong or you're not welcome. And behind every strong community, state, and country is another message that says, yes, you are. And that's exactly what we're trying to do. Because in this great country, in this great state of North Carolina, we must always welcome all people, regardless of the way they look, regardless of the way they pray, regardless of the way they love, right? We should be able to welcome people with open arms because our diversity is our greatest strength. So I'm excited to be a champion on behalf of you folks in North Mecklenburg to make sure we are increasing public safety for all people and making sure people feel welcomed in North Carolina. Again, we've got to roll up our sleeves. Many of you know the makeup of the North Carolina General Assembly, and it's going to be an uphill battle for us to get this Hate Crime Prevention Act passed. Senator Jay Chaudhry has introduced this bill 3 times in the North Carolina Senate, Forget a floor vote, it hasn't even received a committee hearing, unfortunately, because of the makeup of the General Assembly. This is my second time introducing this bill, and now more than ever, with COVID-19, which you've seen has been a significant impact and rise on the Asian American community, which you've seen in Atlanta and so many other parts of our state. We've got to treat people right in our state and our country. So it's an honor and privilege to be here. Pam, thank you for having me. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out anytime. Mujtaba Muhammad, thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator. I would have liked to have added this to our what you can do next, but we'll be sending something out in regards to that. Our next speaker is Cornelius Town Commissioner Tricia Sisson. Commissioner Sisson was elected in 2019 and is the first female elected to the Cornelius Town Board since 2013. She is currently the only female and the youngest commissioner in Cornelius. Commissioner Sisson loves our town and has a passion for service. Commissioner Sisson.
Thank you all for having me tonight. I have prepared some remarks, and I'm going to stick to script because there's some really terrific speakers behind me, and I don't want to take any more of my time, and my fellow commissioners here will let you know that if I'm on the dais and I talk a lot, I just ramble, so I'll stick to my remarks. Good evening. On behalf of the Cornelius Town Board and the Mayor, who several of them are here tonight, and they were introduced earlier, I want to thank Unity and Community for including the town of Cornelius in today's peaceful rally to show support and solidarity to our brothers and sisters in the Asian American community. I also thank Unity and Community for asking me, as the only elected woman on the Cornelius Town Board, to speak to you today. Your Cornelius Town Board supports the efforts of the community to foster diversity and equality in our town and throughout the region. As a town commissioner, a small business owner, and a woman, I have a passion for promoting diversity and an intolerance toward discrimination in any form. I began my volunteer work with the Lake Norman Chamber of Commerce over 10 years ago, serving on the Chamber's Diversity Council, a role that gave me a true sense of pride, seeing the many positive impacts the programs that the Diversity Council put on had on our women and minority businesses and our nonprofits in the Lake Norman area. I also currently mentor a region sales manager in my company. She's a young Asian American woman who has had, I would say, more of an impact on my development than I have had on hers. She has brought to me an education and insight into the increased frequency and escalation of severity in hate crimes against the Asian American and Pacific Islander community that have been occurring over the past year. She recently told me about an incident during which a 30-year-old man attacked an elderly Chinese woman in broad daylight. That incident happened very recently on a Wednesday morning, less than a mile from her home in San Francisco. As she relayed this incident to me, I could feel how extremely emotional and upset it made her. We can all agree that violence against any community should never be tolerated, as we as elected officials must ensure we are doing our part in this effort, and I thank the Senator for that. We know that evil exists in our world, and unfortunately, we cannot extinguish all evil. Evil exists in the hearts of those who foster hate. While we cannot know what is in the minds of those who commit acts of violence against others, we can be sure that hate exists in their hearts, or these acts would not take place. In the face of such hate, what can we do to promote unity between all cultures? What we must do is to set the example of what good looks like. We, as the leaders in our community, must remember that others will always look to emulate our actions. when we denounce hate in all forms and boldly commit to diversity and inclusion, we will see others in our community follow our lead. When we as leaders stand with all minority groups and encourage unity among all people, we have the opportunity to begin a conversation to promote positive racial and ethnic relations in order to encourage respect and understanding, in the hope that no person should ever have to deal with hate based on the color of their skin, their nationality, or their beliefs. As a Christian woman, I pray daily for healing in all the communities who find themselves subjected to discrimination and hate. And I applaud Unity and Community for the work you as leaders do to promote the healing by creating awareness and urging a conversation for change. I want to thank you again for all of you who chose to come out here to this peaceful rally, especially in this very inclement weather. And may God support our mission. May God bless our community and our nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Sisson. At this point, I am so happy to introduce Dr. Yurka Tamura. I had the pleasure of meeting Yurka in an amazing Zoom event that was sponsored by the Asian American Initiative at Davidson College. And she was just so helpful in helping me to connect with two of our other speakers. So, thank you. Yurka is a visiting assistant professor in the program of humanities and the Department of Gender and Sexuality Studies at Davidson College. Yurka.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me back there. There's some more chairs in the back too. Great, thank you. Hi. I wrote this thinking, I don't know who I'm gonna meet today, but I thought maybe giving my experience might help, so please bear with me for 5 minutes. So thank you so much for your solidarity. Just to see people gathering like this means so much to me. My students, many of them are of Asian descent, they felt really invisible in this whole media broadcasting about anti-Asian violence. They felt that they don't have a language to talk about the erasure of their voices. And they felt fatigued. And when I say they, I include myself in that. I felt fatigued. I left my country that I was born in more than 2 decades ago, and I was a racial minority and a woman. I didn't see in my own country a way to survive. And recently I've learned that being Asian woman, I'm also the most targeted person disposable here. I felt like I have nowhere else to go. So it means so much that actually these gatherings happening, that somebody cares. And that, I think, I'm gonna tell that to students for sure. I teach at Davidson College, and I teach a lot of gender and sexuality related issues and the Asian studies area as well. And we talk about model minority. And today I was told in a class, Nate was in one of my class too, like you're one of my students, that people don't know what model minority is. So I wanted to say a little bit about that. So model minority discourse often pits the Asians against other minorities and immigrants. And while pressuring Asians to conform and prove that we're good citizens and we can labor for you, right? So we're at the US service of the United States. So a supportive gathering like this means a lot, that we're not just another labor hands, but we are seen and having the same human rights. So to me, what our body matters like that matters a lot to me. So in my classes, I teach that racism always has history. It doesn't just spring up from nowhere. And anti-Asian hate has more than a century of history. Exclusions and incarceration and encampment, you know this history. But I would also argue that stereotypes have a history. For example, the hypersexualized Asian women's image do have history of the US involvement with Asian nations and dominance. The Atlanta shooting didn't happen because someone was just having a bad day and couldn't take it anymore. It was a racist and sexist imagination rooted in white male supremacy enacted on actual people's bodies. So people have to pay for this imagination with their lives. And I will say that we have seen enough results, the end product of racism and other forms of discrimination, that is, lives of the people of color and immigrants, people with actual human material bodies taken away. Lives stopped mattering. So this is why a gathering like this means so much to me. You're showing up and listening and caring and learning about anti-Asian hate tells me that my voice matters. My students' voice matter. As I condemn the murders in Atlanta and increasing anti-Asian violence elsewhere in the US and Canada, I will also condemn the ways people discuss racial violence as not a big matter, but just a difference in ideology, opinion, and so forth. The way we discuss things or not discuss things do matter. If all lives really matter equally in our physical reality like here today, no one has to really raise voice to say whose life must matter, right? So today, Asians and Blacks and many other minorities are being asked to be vigilant for safety, and on top of everything we do to prove that we're good citizens, we're also being asked to prove that we deserve the same human rights. This is something to consider. So in the case of current anti-Asian hate violence, women tend to be more targeted. And as a woman and Asian, and as an immigrant, I care so much about what happened in Atlanta and elsewhere, cities and borders today. But maybe I care because I'm a human who has a body that can be harmed and die. And that's enough reason for me to care. Maybe you're here today because you have been targeted by some racial or sexual or other forms of discrimination or violence. Or maybe you know someone who's Asian and who is hurting. But maybe we're all here today because we have families and future to protect and that we care about our own town. And maybe we're here because we have our bodies that can empathize with each other's sufferings. So I'm claiming here that just having a body is enough reason for me to gather and care, and that gives me so much hope. And your presence in body today gives me so much hope. So thank you, Cornelius, for gathering in your body to show the Asian voices and lives that we matter, and also that you show that as living humans, we can all extend our care. I hope this is a beginning of more of Asian American Alliance and solidarity for Black Lives Matter, as well as all of us to reach out and survive together. So thank you.
So, I really want to thank you for those remarks, Yorka. At this point, I am pleased to introduce our next speaker, my neighbor and my friend, Charu Kamaria. To be clear now, those are not the reasons that I asked Charu to speak. Charu is the daughter of Indian immigrants and an Emmy award-winning journalist. She is the host of a weekly podcast, and you'll see that on, if you got the sheet, what to do next. Her weekly podcast is called The Story with Charu. So I hope we'll all be checking it out. Charu.
Thank you, Pam. Thanks so much. First of all, thank you all for coming here, because you being here, you already know that we have a problem. You wouldn't be here today if you didn't know this already. And me being able to stand here as an Asian woman, and for you to stand here and know that they already know that there's been a huge uptick in violence against actually all minorities in the last 5 years. We know that it's been a historic problem, but it has upticked, and at astronomical rate for Asian Americans, and some Indians in that included as well. So thank you, okay? I think when we leave here today, you get it. You're the choir, as they say, right? When we go home, we have to do work within our own communities. I've been working in my community, in the Indian community, to confront anti-Blackness, talking to Indians and Asians about any anti-Black attitudes we have. okay? I know I have seen so many black voices rise over the last week to say, to stop this Asian hate, but I've also seen some folks say they don't support us. Where were they? I was here last summer when George Floyd was murdered. I will be here for black folks, beside you, behind you, in front of you, whatever you need. When you go home and you hear that old narrative being played out that blacks and Asians, we don't get along, especially East Asians, blacks, stop it. Stop it right there and tell them no, because you met an Indian sister, okay, who said, no, she'll be here. She supports us. We have to stop that. We have got to build bridges and start working together. If you're Caucasian and you're white and you're here, there's a lot of work to be done in those communities around especially discomfort talking about race and historical record and fact. It's so uncomfortable and people shut down. So assemble with other white folks where you can, whether that's your churches, your groups, whatever, your book clubs. Get with folks to talk about, why am I uncomfortable? What am I feeling here? We're processing trauma ourselves. You know, and I know black folks are getting together talking about the trauma that they've seen and having to re-endure trauma every time you hear another elderly Asian is attacked. You know, my kids hearing this on NPR, we don't even let them watch the news, and saying, can we FaceTime Nana this morning? You know, we're processing that trauma, okay? Go home and talk to your other white folks, like, how can we solve it? Let's get past the discomfort so we can address this. This is the #1 thing facing our nation, is this problem of not being able to talk about race and historical fact. When we solve this problem, we can really be the greatest country on earth, I promise you, because there's no country that has the diversity that we have, because the best and the brightest have come here, okay? And despite everything black folks have been through, they excel. They have managed to still excel. So if we can get past this, we can get past anything, but we've really got to face the discomfort and talk about this. So I thank you for being here, and thank you for supporting us.
Thank you, Charlie. Our next speaker, I am really excited about. One of the things that Unity and Community struggles with is the lack of young people who are active with us. And so to have so many here in the audience and so many on our speaker platform is just, I can't even describe the feeling it brings. So I do hope that the relationships that Yurka and Charu have talked about, that we can continue to have those kind of conversations and working together for the good of all of us. So our next speaker is Jared Lindo. Jared is a senior at Davidson College, majoring in political science. That was my major, Jared. He is the president of the Black Student Coalition and the vice president of Pi Mu chapter of Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity. And according to Yurka, you are the best student on campus. Sure.
Can everybody hear me in here? Outside? Y'all hear me okay? Cool. So before I get into the bulk of what I'm going to speak with you all about, I want to do a quick call and response, just to, send an energy in the room. We've been here for a little bit. So this is a West African call and response, and it's real straightforward. When I say I go, you all say I'm in. And that's just to show that, I'm welcoming your attention, that you all are giving it to me, okay? I go.
Amen.
I go.
Amen.
I go.
Amen.
Good. That sounded loud. So, I'm humbled to be in fellowship with you all this evening to discuss something that continues to plague us all every day. Racially motivated violence. Hate crimes. Because that is what we need to continue to call
While we remember to mourn for the victims this year and years prior, it's also important that we have to continue to fight for them, together. The tragic incidents of last week and weeks prior, they're gonna get, you know how the media works, they're going to get swept under the rug. Currently, investigative efforts are, scratching their heads on what the motives of the perpetrators were. However, the writing is on the wall. We wouldn't be here if we didn't know that. The uptick in instances of racial violence towards Asian Americans, right, as well as the continuous oppression, the systems of oppression, and moments of oppression towards Black Americans at the hands of law enforcement, these are all hate crimes. And we need to understand that achieving justice for all those that we've lost means being unwavering in our fight for equity and racial justice. While we're here, we continue to say their names, but we also have to name the circumstances in which we lost them. Hate crimes. And we must hear them so loud that our neighbors, lawyers, judges, and our elected officials hear our voices as they reverberate through our chambers. We are not going to be denied, rain or shine, because a lot of people came out even in the rain. So a final point before I close, we can't ignore the history of conflict between Black Americans and Asian Americans. We know it exists. Dr. Tomra just mentioned it, so thank you for that. All this really does is strengthen the grip that white supremacy has on us all. The point in us gathering here today is to achieve justice and equity, a task that has to be done together with everybody in the room, with all the faces in the room, no matter where you come from. Black and Indigenous people of color have been victimized by racial triangulation for an extremely long time, resulting in this power struggle between marginalized groups. And all that does is confuse us on what the true enemy is. Realistically, what good has fighting done for us? And again, what else do we have to try besides working together? To conclude, I'm going to share a quote from one of my heroes, Huey Newton. And in his book, Revolutionary Suicide, he writes, "We have such a strong desire to live with hope and human dignity that existence without them is impossible. I encourage all of you to leave here today with an intention of hope, humanity, and an understanding that we cannot dismantle systemic oppression separately, but together and with love for one another." Thank y'all for having me.
Thank you, Jared. Thank you. And now I'm happy to introduce our next speaker, Georgia Chapman. And Georgia is a junior at Lake Norman Charter. She started a youth Black Lives Matter group, which is partnered with Global Minds United. Georgia led a march and spoke at a rally in Davidson this summer after George Floyd's murder to stand up for racial equality. Georgia.
My name is Georgia Chapman, and I'm a junior at Lake Norman Charter High School. I, along with Maddie Reese and Maya Goldsberry, started Youth for Black Lives Matter after the murder of George Floyd. So we were a part of a rally in Davidson, at which point I spoke about using our voices to stand up against racial inequality. Youth for Black Lives Matter is a part of Global Minds United Think Act program, which encourages students to take their feelings and thoughts and turn it into positive action. Every person, no matter what their race may be, deserves to be treated with kindness and respect. Statistically, hate crimes targeting Asian Americans have spiked by 150% in major U.S. cities over the past year. We can no longer be desensitized as we witness these acts of violence and racial hatred on TV or read it in the papers. We can no longer be silent because in our silence we are complicit. We can no longer be bystanders. We must feel the pain and suffering of those who are being harmed and the grief that their family and friends suffer. We have to address implicit bias and bring it into awareness. We have reached a tipping point. It is time for education. It is time for us to focus on mental health. It is time for us to recognize generational patterns of racism, and no matter if you are 15 or 70, you have the ability to change. We all have the opportunity to become compassionate, competent, and active local citizens. We must get back to our core of humanity and basic human rights. So thank you for standing with me today in unity, solidarity, and hopefulness that we can take this fear and hatred and transform it into respect and love for our fellow human beings and our community. So thank you.
Thank you, Georgia. And now for our last speaker of the evening, the other best student at Davidson College. This is Nade Bai. I'm thrilled to introduce Nade. He is also a student at Davidson. He's a junior, majoring in interdisciplinary studies. He is the leader of the Pan-Asian Student Association at Davidson and one of the leaders of the Asian American Initiative. Nade was born in the US, but grew up in China. He returned to the US when he was 13. And I, for one, am glad that you came back, Nade. Come on.
Thank you so much, Pam. That was a very gracious introduction. Dr. Tamura, I was a bit hurt when you admitted that I was That's a tough semester. I'm trying my best. Again, I want to thank everybody for coming out. Can everybody hear me? Awesome. Thank you. So before we begin, I would like to observe a moment of silence to honor and respect the victims of the senseless tragedy that happened in Atlanta on March 16th. Please take a moment of silence as I read their names. Sun Chung Park, Hyun Jung Grant, Sun Cha Kim, Young Yue, Delana Ashley Young, Paul Andre Michels, Xiaojie Tan, Daoyou Feng. They were mothers, daughters, friends, and family. I hope we remember them as such. We honor them and countless others, seen and unseen, heard and unheard. Those who have suffered the brutality of racism and the persistent wounds of hatred. We stand in solidarity with the victims and their families, and today strongly condemn all forms of hate against Asian and Asian American communities, here and elsewhere, at home and beyond. I want to begin by thanking everyone who has taken the time and effort to show up here today. Your presence is an encouraging one that reminds us that where there is hatred and ignorance, it will always be met with compassion and understanding. Thank you. Growing up, telling people where I was from was always a challenge. When they were dissatisfied with my answer, I'd look at them like they finally got me and say, I'm from the South. I'm from here. They're like, no, where are you really from? You sure don't look like you're from here. I'd smile slyly and clarify, I'm from the south of China. Born in the United States, but having grown up in China, I embodied both of my unique linguistic and cultural backgrounds, but often I felt more like an imposter, an outsider in both. How could I claim to be from a country that refused to claim me? It was devastating to hear the way politicians described COVID-19 as both the Chinese virus and also the Kung flu. It was even more devastating to hear friends and others repeat after them, as if we, Asian Americans, were the sole carriers of this disease, guilty only through association. I feared for my great aunt, who lived alone in the Bay Area of San Francisco. I feared for her when I saw the brutal and senseless attacks on elderly people, attacks for no other reason but for the sheer pleasure of inflicting pain on someone perceived as different. I feared for her in a time where the color of your skin determined where you could be from, and the proficiency of your language determined the extent of your humanity. What I want to make clear here today is that these events are not separate from each other, disjoint from a common history. Anti-Asian racism is embedded and deeply entwined with the founding of this nation. From the Chinese Exclusion Acts of 1882 that informed US immigration policy, to the massacre of 1871, which saw the lynching of 19 young boys and men, Asian Americans have always suffered under this perpetual suspicion of guilt, as both foreigners or as invisible aliens. We have been erased, historically, from the narrative of this nation, as passive bystanders instead of active participants. I can attest to this personally. In history class in high school, my teacher probably spent more time on the horse of Robert E. Lee, Traveler, than the entirety of US immigration in the 19th century. I can clearly remember thinking to myself, that must have been some horse. What troubles me deeply today is not the rise in hate that we gather here to condemn, but the nature of our confrontation. Why is it that we condemn problems within our society only once lives have been lost? Why is it that we only acknowledge these problems when we choose to see it? The central and often unspoken question underlying all of it is this: are Asian Americans injured or finally injured enough to finally deserve our attention as a nation? Racism towards Asian American people have always been invisible because Asian Americans have always been invisible. We can no longer passively accept the categories and roles to which this country prescribes us. Quiet, apolitical, and docile subjects. To be seen, we must continue to vocalize who we are and our changing role in this changing country. Despite everything, I hold on to faith. This country is the only place in the world where you can get authentic tacos from across the street and walk down and pray at a mosque. The only place in the world where there are 10 languages available to take your driver's license test in. We have always been a mismatched hodgepodge of languages and peoples, of cultures and histories, and diversity has always been our strength. We are nothing without it. And although the road to progress has oftentimes been bloody, difficult, and unforgiving, I believe that it will continue to get better, because we choose to. We choose to believe in the face of uncertainty and doubt. We choose to believe in the good and decency of those who are different from us, and in time, who will become familiar. The experiences of my life have led me to this very conclusion, one that I revisit again and again, and find myself both unable and unwilling to disprove. That at the end of the day, we have much more in common than we ever do different. I urge each and every one of us here to lean into that commonality, that shared nature which defines us not only as people of this country, but as fellow human beings. I believe that the challenge of our country and the challenge of this democracy is not just about identifying with people whom we see resemble us, nor is it about giving up our own self-interests. It is about learning to see our self-interests as profoundly and inevitably entwined with the interests of others. We are your friends, your neighbors, your co-workers, your fellow brothers and sisters. I belong here. We belong here. Asian Americans belong here. Thank you.
This is probably not the right language to use in an anti-violence rally, but you killed it, man. Thank you. I want to thank Nate and all of our speakers. You were all amazing. And I want to thank all of you for coming out in this terrible weather and showing what Cornelius and Davidson and Huntersville and all the other places you're from, that we are committed to diversity. We are committed to working together to equity and equality. And I loved that we were able to hear from our Asian brothers and sisters in particular. As this afternoon was going on and the rain chances went from 10% to 100%, I kept, was like, oh, should we cancel? And it's like, you know, I didn't like the message that was gonna send to you all. And so, God, thank you. I know it was Him who made this possible. So, in case you are wondering what you can do now, I think many of you got the handout that we have. There's some really good information on there from the Asian American Initiative at Davidson, and also from Charu. Her podcast information is on there. So thank you again. Thank you for coming out. Thank you for showing your support. Good night, everyone.